I'm Abigail, and I never thought grief could be this quiet, this invisible, this dismissed by the very people who were supposed to love me most. The day we buried my daughter Emily, the sun was almost cruel in how beautifully it shone. There were birds chirping, flowers in bloom, and the sky was that soft shade of blue Emily used to giggle at when we held her in the garden. I stood in the Garden of Angels section of Greenview Cemetery, staring at a casket far too small, far too white, as my husband Michael gripped my hand and tried not to fall apart beside me. Friends came. Michael's family came. My best friend from college flew in with her newborn, eyes filled with tears. The nurses I worked with at the pediatric ward sent food and cards and candles. But my parents, Margaret and Richard, didn't come. My brother Jason didn't come. They were 3 miles away, clinking champagne glasses in a backyard full of music and balloons and laughing guests, celebrating Jason's engagement pool party. The contrast was so absurd it bordered on satire, except there was nothing funny about it. Especially when, hours before the funeral, my mother's voice crackled through the phone and said, "It's just a baby, Abigail. Jason's party matters more." I remember how the words landed in my chest, like glass shattering beneath skin. And yet, I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just said, "I see," and hung up. That night, as I sat on the nursery floor, the mobile above the crib still spinning gently, casting shadows shaped like stars across the walls, I realized something had broken. Not just in me, but between us. It wasn't the first time. Growing up, I always knew I was second. Jason, the golden boy, the prodigy with average grades but excellent timing, always got the spotlight. When he made the middle school soccer team, they threw a barbecue. When I got into the honors program, they blinked and said, "That's nice," before asking Jason what time his game was. At first, I told myself it was harmless, just a family dynamic. Some parents are just more expressive with one child than another. But by the time I met Michael in college, I understood what real love and interest looked like. His parents remembered our anniversary. Mine forgot my birthday more than once. But I still hoped. When I told them I was pregnant with Emily, my mother said, "Oh, that's nice," and then asked if I knew Jason might be up for a regional manager role. When Emily was born, Michael's parents were in the hospital within hours, crying, holding her, taking photos like she was the 8th wonder of the world. My parents came the next day, brought no gifts, stayed 45 minutes, and left because my mom had a hair appointment. They held her like she might stain their clothes. I still sent them pictures every week. First smile, first giggle, her chubby legs and new socks. Sometimes my mom replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Sometimes nothing at all. But still, I tried. I wanted Emily to be loved by them, even if I never really was. The week before Emily died, she had a runny nose. Nothing serious. I took her to the pediatrician. Viral. Should pass. And it did. She got better. She laughed. She drank her bottle. She slept peacefully. That night, Michael and I kissed her forehead, laid her gently in her crib, and turned on the monitor. By morning, the silence was a scream. Emily hadn't woken up. She wasn't breathing. I touched her cheek. It was cold. I screamed. Michael ran. The next hours were a blur of sirens and separate and sterile white rooms and a doctor saying, "I'm so sorry." They called it SIDS, Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, a diagnosis that explained nothing, only named the unnameable. I remember holding her one last time. I remember her weight in my arms. I remember the numbness. I remember the chaplain asking if I believed in heaven, and I wanted to scream, "I don't even believe this is real." I called my mother. I told her Emily died. She paused. She said, "Oh, that's terrible." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if she should come. She just said, "Let us know the details." That was it. Michael's parents arrived before we left the hospital. My parents never did. A few days later, I called to tell them the funeral would be Friday at 11. My mother said, "Oh dear, that's Jason's pool party. We've already committed." She said it like it was a dentist appointment. She said it like it couldn't be moved. She said it like my daughter's death was a scheduling inconvenience. I couldn't respond. I couldn't find language that existed between disbelief and rage. She continued, "You understand, don't you, Abby? Jason's engagement is a once-in-a-lifetime event, and it's just a baby. You can have another one." That night I sat in the rocking chair in Emily's nursery and I didn't move for hours. Michael found me. His face was twisted with pain. He wanted to yell, to drive to their house and demand answers. I told him not to. I told him it wouldn't matter. They had always chosen Jason. This was just the final proof. The morning of the funeral, I dressed in silence. I stared at the black dress and wondered if I should wear blue instead, Emily's favorite. But black felt right. Not because it was respectful, because it was the absence of color, because it matched the nothingness I felt. The cemetery was full of people who loved her, full of people who had only known her 6 months but cried like she had been in their lives forever. My parents were not among them. Jason sent a text. "Sorry about the baby. Hope the funeral goes okay. Excited to see everyone at the party later." I turned off my phone. At the reception afterward, someone asked where my parents were. I lied. I said they were sick. I didn't want to share the shame. I didn't want the pity. That came later, when I opened Instagram and saw my mother smiling poolside with a mimosa, tagged, "Had best party ever." I stared at that photo for 15 minutes, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the phone. The caption read, "Celebrating Jason and Steph with love, laughter, and bubbles." Emily's casket had been lowered into the ground 32 minutes before that photo was posted. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just grief. This was betrayal. This was erasure. And I couldn't stay silent. Not for Emily. Not anymore. The day after the funeral, Michael and I sat in Emily's nursery with the lights off, surrounded by her things untouched. The pink blanket folded on the edge of her crib still smelled faintly of baby shampoo and warmth. Her pacifier lay beneath the rocking chair where I used to nurse her, the floor still creaking in the same spot. It was too soon to pack anything away. It felt like packing away proof that she existed. Michael had his head in his hands. He hadn't shaved. I hadn't eaten. The house was a stillness neither of us could bear to break. I opened the drawer of Emily's dresser and found a tiny pair of socks with giraffes on them. They were still folded together, unworn. I pressed them to my chest and sat on the floor without speaking. At some point, Michael joined me, and we sat that way until the streetlights came on. When the phone rang that evening, I didn't look. I already knew the number, my mother. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, she called again. Then again. I finally picked up, not out of curiosity but exhaustion. "Abby, how are you?" Her voice was breezy, like she was calling to ask about dinner plans, not to follow up on the funeral she had skipped. "You missed your granddaughter's funeral," I said without preamble. You posted pool party photos while I watched her casket disappear into the earth." There was a pause. "Well, you can't live in grief forever, Abigail. You need to move forward. That's why I'm calling. We'd love for you and Michael to come to Sunday dinner. Jason and Stephanie will be there. They want to tell you about the venue for the wedding." I didn't speak. My fingers tightened around the phone. "It might be good for you to get out of the house," she continued. "Being around joy can be healing." I hung up without a word. When I told Michael, he didn't say anything either. He just reached for my hand and held it tight. The invitation to Jason's engagement party came in the mail 2 days later. Heavy cream cardstock, gold-embossed lettering, swirling fonts, my mother's signature touch. I read it once, then slid it into the trash without ceremony. That evening, I sent a text to my parents. "Michael and I won't be attending. Still grieving the death of our daughter." My mother's response came 5 minutes later. "We think it's important that you start moving on. Don't isolate yourself. Family is what gets you through loss." The words felt like acid. Family. The word they loved to wield but never lived up to. Jason called next. His voice was oddly cheerful. "Hey, Mom's freaking out because you're skipping the party. Can't you just come for an hour or something? It's important to them." I stared at the wall, trying to decide if he was serious. "Emily's funeral was important too," I said. "Yeah, but that's different. I mean, I barely knew her." My jaw tightened. "She was your niece, Jason. You met her once. I didn't want to get too attached," he said after a beat. "You know, in case something happened. Babies are fragile." I ended the call. No anger, just a click. I didn't have room left for his explanations. I had grief taking up all the space in my body. That night I began writing everything down. Not just what happened, not just the missed funeral, everything, every forgotten birthday, every time they changed plans for Jason. The day I got my acceptance letter to the nursing program and they asked if I'd remembered to feed the dog. The Christmas I spent alone in my dorm because Jason had booked a last-minute vacation and my parents gave away my plane ticket. I wrote it all, line by line, like assembling a case. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't new. It had just escalated to something unforgivable. I joined an online group for grieving parents. I posted a short message about losing Emily to SIDS and my parents missing the funeral. Within hours, strangers responded with compassion, support, and stories of their own. One mother wrote, "My sister said the same thing, it was just a baby." That broke me more than the loss itself. I cried reading that. I wasn't alone. Not in this pain, not in this betrayal. Our stories echoed each other like wind in a canyon. Then one of the moderators messaged me privately. She had read my post. She was also a licensed therapist who worked with bereaved parents. Her name was Patrice. She offered to speak with me on a sliding scale, no pressure. I accepted. At our first session, I didn't know how to start. She asked me to tell her about Emily, not the death, the life. No one had asked me that, not even my own parents. I described her laugh, her chubby fingers, the way she tilted her head when Michael sang to her. I showed Patrice a photo. Her eyes softened. She was beautiful, she said, and just like that, I broke. I cried until my ribs hurt, the kind of grief that scrapes the inside of your chest. Over the next few weeks, I unpacked not just the loss of Emily, but the ache of being invisible for decades. Patrice used words like scapegoat, enmeshment, emotional neglect. She drew diagrams of family systems. You were trained to minimize your needs, she said, so when your needs finally screamed, they didn't know how to hear them. What do I do now? I asked during one session. That depends, she said. What would justice look like for you? I thought for a long time. I want them to understand what they did. I want them to feel it, just for a second. I want them to know they missed something sacred. I want them to stop pretending they were good parents. That's not revenge, she said. That's truth. Michael stood by me through all of it. He started cooking again. He'd leave little notes in the fridge. Remember to breathe. Take your time. I love you more than air. We'd sit in the nursery sometimes, not to cry, but just to remember. One night, I told him I wanted to confront my parents. Not with yelling, I said, with clarity, with a mirror. He nodded. Whatever you need, he said. You're not alone in this. So I wrote a letter, a long one. I wrote about every moment. I printed out the Instagram post of the champagne toast. I gathered screenshots, texts, photos, dates, and then I texted my parents. I'd like to meet with you on Sunday, just the three of us. 2 p.m. My mother replied within minutes. Wonderful. I'm glad you're ready to move on. I'll bake your favorite lemon cake. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding my phone, thinking about how tone-deaf someone had to be to think lemon cake could fix the fracture they had left in me. They think this is about moving on, I told Michael. They have no idea this is about what they destroyed. They'll find out, he said. Just go in, speak your truth, and let the chips fall. That Sunday, I dressed carefully. A soft blue blouse, Emily's birthstone on a chain around my neck. I placed her framed photo in my purse along with the letter. I drove to the house I grew up in and parked in front for a full 10 minutes. The grass was cut, the flowers were bright, the house looked the same. I didn't. When I knocked, my mother opened the door wearing pearls and a floral apron. Abby, she said, beaming, come in. You look well. I didn't reply. I walked into the living room and saw my father folding his newspaper. Let's sit, I said. I have something to say. They blinked but obeyed. I placed Emily's photo on the coffee table. This is Emily, your granddaughter, the one you didn't bury. My mother opened her mouth. I held up my hand. Not yet. Listen first, then respond. And then I began to speak. They didn't interrupt. Not at first. They sat there on the same pale beige sofa where I had once curled up after school waiting for someone to notice my presence, waiting for approval that never came. My mother's hands were folded in her lap, her knuckles white. My father leaned forward, elbows on knees, his gaze locked not on me, but on the photo of Emily resting silently on the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I read every word of the letter I had written, every sentence a small, precise incision through years of silenced hurt. I told them what it felt like to stand beside a casket so small it barely seemed real. I described the chill of that morning air as we lowered my baby girl into the ground, her entire life reduced to a nameplate and a stretch of disturbed soil. I told them about the photo, how I found it online hours after the burial. My mother smiling wide, glass in hand. My father clinking drinks with strangers, their backs turned on the only grandchild they would ever lose. You said it was just a baby, I said quietly, my voice trembling but unwavering. You said I could have another, as if that would erase her, as if children were something to be reordered like dinner reservations. My mother gasped, a soft, breathless sound, but still she said nothing. My father finally looked up. "We didn't mean it that way," he said, voice low and hoarse. "Then why did you say it?" I asked. "Why did you choose a celebration over a funeral? Why did you lie to our family and say it was your back?" He opened his mouth and closed it again. "I don't know," he said finally, "because it was easier, because we didn't want people to judge us." "And what about me?" I asked. "What about Emily? Did you think I wouldn't judge you, or did you just not care?" My mother stood then, slowly, her legs shaky, her hands reaching for the photograph. She stared at it for a long time, brushing her fingers against the frame like it might come alive. "She has your eyes," she whispered. "I didn't realize until now." I let the silence stretch. I needed her to sit with it, to feel what it meant to realize too late that someone had existed. "You say you want to move forward," I said, "but you haven't even acknowledged where you were. You keep calling it a party, an obligation. You act like this is a misunderstanding. It's not. It's a choice, and now you have to live with it." My father stood too, his shoulders stiff, his voice brittle. "Abigail, we made a mistake, but grief doesn't have a rule book. Maybe we didn't know what to say or how to help." "So you said nothing," I replied. "You did nothing. And then you blamed me for hurting because your silence was more comfortable than my truth." My mother turned to me then, tears finally sliding down her cheek. "We didn't know you were keeping score." "I wasn't," I said, "but now I have to, because someone has to make sure Emily's life is counted. You didn't, so I am." She sat down again, suddenly smaller, like the weight of her own decisions had finally settled on her spine. My father reached out, resting his hand on hers, and for once they didn't seem united in judgment. They seemed uncertain, raw. "What happens now?" my father asked. "That depends on you," I said. "I'm not cutting you off, but I'm stepping back. I need space. I need boundaries. And I need you to decide whether you're willing to accept responsibility instead of rewriting the story to make yourselves feel better." They nodded, slowly, as if absorbing the terms of a new contract they hadn't expected to sign. I picked up Emily's photo, held it close to my chest. Her name was Emily Grace. She was 6 months old. She liked the sound of the washing machine and hated peas. She smiled every time Michael said banana in a funny voice. She existed. She mattered. And she deserved more than what you gave her. I turned to go. My mother called out softly, "Abby, I'm sorry." I paused, but didn't turn around. "Then show me. When you're ready to show me, we can talk." The door closed behind me with a click that felt like release. In the car, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, hands shaking. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just breathed, deep and slow, and felt something in my chest loosen. I had spoken the unspeakable. I had stood for my daughter. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. When I arrived home, Michael met me at the door. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He saw it on my face. I placed Emily's photo on the kitchen table beside the candle we lit each evening in her memory. "I did it," I said. He nodded and pulled me into his arms. "I knew you would." That night I wrote in my journal, not about anger, but about clarity. About how standing in the truth isn't easy, but necessary. About how grief can fracture a family or reveal the cracks that were already there. I didn't know what the future with my parents would look like. I didn't know if they would change or retreat. But I knew what I had done. I had turned toward the pain instead of away from it. And I had said, "This matters." Emily mattered. I mattered. That had to be enough. The morning of what would have been Emily's first birthday came quietly, like mist curling over still water. There were no balloons, no streamers, no cake. Just silence and the ache of imagining what could have been. Michael rose early, his footsteps gentle, and when I walked into the kitchen, he was already preparing breakfast, his eyes puffy but determined. A single pink candle sat on the table beside a bowl of blueberries, Emily's favorite, when we had just begun experimenting with solids. He didn't say much, neither did I. Some grief becomes so familiar that words feel like clutter. After we ate in near silence, we packed a small bag and drove to the garden. It had taken months to create this place. What started as an idea, a way to honor her memory, had grown into a sanctuary. In the center stood the angel statue Michael's parents had donated, encircled by white roses, tulips, and forget-me-nots. Today, we brought one new plant, a tiny flowering cherry tree. Michael dug the hole while I held the sapling, and when we placed it in the ground, I whispered Emily's name like a blessing. The breeze shifted. I didn't believe in signs, not really, but in that moment the sunlight broke through the clouds and bathed the tree in gold. And for 1 second, I felt her, not as a ghost or vision, but as presence, as legacy. We sat on the bench nearby, fingers laced, watching the wind play with the new blossoms. "She would have been running by now," I said softly, pulling everything off the shelves, clapping for herself when she said a new word. Michael squeezed my hand. "She still changed everything." He was right. Emily's short life had shifted the ground beneath us. She had revealed fault lines in our family, in ourselves, and left behind not just pain, but purpose. That afternoon, I checked my mailbox and found a small cream envelope with no return address. Inside was a note written in my father's unmistakable block handwriting. "Abigail, we visited the garden today. I didn't want to intrude, so we came early. Your mother brought tulips. I sat there a long time, just sat. I don't have words for what I felt, but I needed you to know we were there. And we remember, Dad." There was no signature from my mother, but later that evening a delivery arrived, a box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a baby blanket, hand-stitched with Emily's name, and a note that simply said, "For what should have been." I cried then, not because the pain was gone, but because for once they weren't pretending it never existed. They were beginning, slowly, to carry it with us. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm that felt more whole than before. Michael and I resumed our volunteer work. I gave a talk at a grief support group titled "The Funeral They Missed." I didn't name names. I didn't have to. The nods around the room told me that my story was not just mine. After the meeting, a woman approached me, her hands trembling. "They told me I was overreacting," she said, voice cracking, "that my baby wasn't a real person yet, but she was. I know she was." I hugged her without speaking. That connection, that silent recognition of shared sorrow became its own kind of healing. At work, I returned to the pediatric floor slowly. The first time I held a newborn again, I almost couldn't breathe. But I stayed. I let the tears come later, at home, in Michael's arms. One of the attending doctors pulled me aside a week later. "Your presence has changed the energy here," she said. "You move differently now, like someone who's learned how to carry something heavy without breaking. I wasn't sure whether that was a compliment or just a truth, but I took it. Summer slipped into fall, and with it came invitations, family dinners, Jason's wedding shower, holiday plans. I accepted some, declined others. I no longer felt obligated to show up and pretend. At one Thanksgiving gathering, my mother passed around a photo album she had quietly compiled of Emily. Most of the photos I had shared in the early months' texts she had responded to with a single emoji, now printed, labeled, bound in a velvet cover. "I know I can't change the past," she said, not looking at me, "but I want her to be remembered." Jason's baby was born that winter, a boy. When he texted me the photo, I stared at the image of my brother holding his son with such reverence and thought about what it meant to be present. He followed up the photo with a message. "We named him Elijah, middle name Michael. I'd like him to grow up knowing he had a cousin named Emily, if that's okay with you." I didn't cry then. I smiled, and I responded with the first emoji I had ever sent him, a heart. That spring, I stood in front of a small audience of nurses, parents, and grief counselors at a remembrance event hosted by the hospital. I told them about Emily, about her laugh, her favorite toy, her 6 months that felt like eternity in a blink all at once. I told them about standing alone at her funeral and finding a way to speak when my voice felt buried with her. "Grief," I said, "doesn't always make people cruel, but it reveals who was willing to love you in the dark. I speak now because my daughter cannot. I honor her because they chose not to, and I live, truly live, so that her brief life continues in me." The applause wasn't loud, but it was real. Afterwards, a young father approached me. "You said something I haven't been able to say," he said. "My parents never acknowledged my daughter's name, never said it out loud. You reminded me that she mattered." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small card with Emily's name and birth date on it, a soft watercolor of her garden on the front. "Then say her name," I whispered. "Say it for her. Say it for you." And he did. I heard it. Her name echoed into the air between us, and something in both of us softened. That evening, back at home, Michael lit a candle in the garden. The cherry tree was taller now, its branches waving in the breeze like a child's arms reaching for the sky. I stood beside him, our fingers touching, and whispered, "We're still here, baby girl, still carrying you." And for once, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole in the way that only truth allows, not fixed, but full. And I knew then, as I know now, that Emily's name would never fade. Not from my lips, not from my story, not from the world I was helping shape with every choice to love louder than the silence.